Welcome to A Few Thoughts About, the show where we dig into thinking and how it shapes our experience of life. Each week, I share insights and observations to get you thinking. No long lectures, just quick, thought-provoking episodes to shift perspectives so that you can make the change you want to make. Let's get into it. Hey, before we get going, I want to extend an invitation to you. This series of podcasts I'm doing is actually for people who are supporting someone going through changing their relationship with alcohol. And oftentimes there's a lot of questions, there's not a lot of understanding, and I'm going to get into this in the episodes. But if you want to get on my list, if you want to reach out to me because you have a specific question, if you want to book some time with me to talk about this, we can do that. Or if you'd like to be on my list so that when I do host groups to talk about it, then you can go to scottpenier.com/podcast right now. There is a place there where you can reach out to me. You can send me a message. Please do it. I know that it is difficult to be the person supporting someone going through this. I know that it can be confusing, and I want to do whatever I can to help make that less confusing and help you feel like you're contributing and working with them in a way that's good for both of you. So scottpenier.com/podcast. Reach out to me there. Let's start the show. Well, hello there, and welcome to A Few Thoughts About Supporting Someone, Part 4, How to Have a Conversation About Drinking. Friend, you have made it. We have made it. We have arrived at the reason you started listening to this series of podcasts in the first place. If you have not listened to episodes 1 through 3, please go back and do so. I'm going to be referencing them as we go through the conversation. But the reality is that this conversation, this drinking conversation, especially if this is not something you have dealt with yourself, it's unlike other conversations. In the first episode, we talked about how difficult it is for support people who haven't struggled with alcohol to understand what it feels like for the drinker, right? We've talked about that. We've talked about the number one thing that support people can do, which is take care of themselves. And the last episode, we talked about compassion and connection. This episode, we're going to take all of that stuff and put it together to talk about having the conversations, actually talking about things. And I want to be very, very clear about the goal of these conversations. It's never about convincing someone. It's never going to be about like forcing someone or controlling someone. Again, like we've talked about this in previous episodes. The goal of these conversations is never to win. It's to stay connected enough so that honesty and change feel possible. And I can tell you, as a drinker, it feels impossible to change. It feels like I'm never going to get there. And one of the best things that a support person can do is have a connected conversation that allows change to feel possible. Man, when you do that, it's really, really incredible. And it's probably one of the best things a support person can do to help people on this road. So I'd like to just start off with an overarching theme, and it's this. You know, a lot of conversations about drinking start off with good intentions and end up with people feeling hurt, defensive, angry, misunderstood, just completely exhausted, depleted, right? And it's usually not because either person is bad. It's because of this. Fear ends up driving the conversation on both sides. Right? You as the supporter have a lot of fear because you're worried about what's going to happen to this person you love. And the drinker has a lot of fear because it feels like shit, I can't live life without alcohol. How am I possibly going to navigate things? How can I possibly do anything? And, I also had fear, by the way, of the damage that I know that I'm doing. Like while I'm continuing to drink, I know there are other things going on that aren't good. Fear ends up being the thing that motivates and drives big emotions and statements, and this almost always leads us to an emotionally loaded conversation that can go sideways very, very quickly. So I'm going to give you some pointers, some tips for having these sort of conversations that are all sort of around this idea of keeping the fear at bay. But at a minimum, I want you to at least keep this idea in your mind that when fear is driving the conversation, it very often leads to, well, not the best results, right? So let's jump into some of these ideas. The first thing I want to talk about is that timing matters more than most people think, right? And this is massive, right? A lot of supporters try to have important conversations while the person is drinking or right after the person is drinking or during a time of big conflict when maybe there's other problems popping up, and almost nothing productive happens there. The conversation that you have at midnight after 5 drinks is usually not the real conversation. And we can just delete the word usually from that, right? The conversation you have at midnight after a whole bunch of drinks is not the real conversation. So if that's the case, then when is the right time? Well, there isn't necessarily a right time, but there are right conditions. And these conditions are really important. First, both of you need to be calm, right? We need to be in a relaxed state. That's often how it makes it a lot easier for us to be able to open up and share. Second, you need to be connected. If the two of you feel like you can have a conversation at that moment, that is the best time. If you are on the same wavelength, right? No one's on their phones. No one's distracted by other things. It's the two of you to have the conversation. That is perfect. And then finally, neither of you can be emotionally flooded. And what I mean by this is like, you can't be in this space where you're feeling a lot of anxiety or a lot of depression or a lot of sadness. Like, it needs to be a space where you can both feel and where you can be comfortable to be as open and honest as you need to be. And so that requires calm, that requires connection, and that requires that you're just not in this overly emotional or difficult place. Now, both of you, especially in dealing with drinking, are gonna be there, right? Like, it's very, very common to be in this place where, you're emotionally hijacked or emotionally flooded. That's fine. It's totally fine. But that also isn't the time to have the conversation. So timing the conversation is incredibly important. The second thing is that fear often disguises itself as criticism. And I mean that as going on inside you. So supporters often sound angry when underneath they're scared or they're hurt or they feel helpless or they're maybe grieving or they're feeling overwhelmed. And so what tends to happen in terms of the language is it tends to come out as saying something, to the drinker, like, you always this and you never that and you promised this and why can't you do that? All of that stuff, all of those emotions, that fear and that hurt and that helplessness and that overwhelm, all valid, right? Again, go back to my previous episode about the most important thing you can do, where I just address this stuff. But when it comes to actually having the conversation, we don't tend to say, I'm scared. It tends to come out as, you did this, or this happened, or you said that. A lot of criticism is fear trying to protect itself. It is fear disguising itself. And when you can get clear on that for yourself, then you're able to show up in a different way. And it doesn't have to be a blaming conversation. You can be like, I am really scared. This is really upsetting to me. That is a much more effective way of being able to communicate and talk about what's really going on. Not the anger that fear kicks up, but the fear itself. The next thing that I want you to understand that is kind of attached to this, and this is something you probably know outside of these conversations, but like, most people stop listening the moment they feel attacked. As soon as someone feels shamed or cornered, or like you're trying to control them, their nervous system shifts into defense and justification and counterattack and all of this stuff. And this might sound very familiar to you. You could have this conversation and say, hey, you know what? We talked about you not drinking, and here you are drinking. And you know what? It's really upsetting. You said you wouldn't do this, right? And if you go in that direction, the second you come at someone that way, they're going to say, well, hang on a second, this happened or that happened. And, one of the things about alcohol use disorder that I've experienced firsthand, and a lot of my clients say the same thing too, it is incredibly easy for us to justify our behavior, right? And so what we need to be careful of as supporters is activating that justification. So when we corner someone, when we attack someone, when we try to push too hard, very often when we do that, that's when the drinker goes into defense and justification. And very often it's not a productive conversation, right? Because then the conversation becomes like someone proving that they're right, and then someone having to defend themselves. And then we get back to this idea of winning. So one thing to keep in mind is this. You can be technically correct and still make the conversation impossible. You might be right that they said they wouldn't do it. You might be right that you've had this conversation a million times. All of that stuff. Yes, 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 yes. But when the frame of the conversation is you are wrong, very quickly that'll shift for the drinker and it becomes unproductive. It becomes an exercise in everyone getting mad at each other and going back to their respective corners. And it doesn't lead to that connection and that calmness that we talked about at the beginning of the episode. The next piece to pay attention to is this. Don't turn every conversation into the alcohol conversation. And this is so important. Many relationships slowly shift. It becomes this like manager-patient thing instead of partners, instead of friends, instead of people who are in this together, instead of family, instead of spouses, whatever your relation is to the person you're supporting. What can happen when every conversation is the alcohol conversation is everything becomes about drinking and recovery and data points and progress or not progress. And we can lose the very thing that made us close in the first place. If alcohol becomes the only thing you talk about, it can slowly become the only thing the relationship feels like. If alcohol becomes the focus of the relationship, then those emotions around alcohol, like the frustration and the sadness and the difficulty, those become the focus of the relationship. So I want you to consider this a reminder to still laugh together, do things together, watch shows, go outside, talk about things, connect, have fun. Don't make the entire relationship about drinking or not drinking. That adds an added layer of stress for both of you and creates this pressure cooker environment that is so difficult for everyone to be fully themselves in. The last piece that I would like to talk about, and this is like the ultimate end goal here. The whole goal of having these conversations is emotional safety, not perfection, right? So a lot of times support people come to me and be like, well, what should I say? Like, how should I talk about this? The reality is, if the emotional tone is there, the words don't matter as much. So if you are calm, if you are open, if you are steady, if you are not panicked, and if the drinker can sense actual genuine care, you're all the way there. Right? You don't need the exact words. There aren't, as a matter of fact, magic words that are going to convince them to stop drinking. So if you are able to show up calm, if you are able to show up ready to connect, absolutely incredible things can happen. People open up more around people who feel safe than around people who feel overly prepared, who feel like they're giving a speech. So show up as you. Create that space of emotional safety, and you will be amazed at what can happen in these conversations. Well, there you go. What do you think? Head on over to scottpiniard.com/podcast. I have so much more I could say about this. If you want to hear that, if you want to reach out and send me an email, if there's anything I can do for you, please go there and send me a note. scottpiniard.com/podcast. That is it for me. That is it for the series. So thank you for listening to all this. And again, please feel free to write me. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you want more of this. I'd love to hear all about it. All right. That's it for me. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I will be back again next week.